province. So we would have had PEI having 10 seats and Alberta having 10 seats. Well, make that one work for me. Or if you came from Ontario or Quebec or BC, imagine how you'd feel knowing that you had 10 seats, so did Alberta, and so did PEI. So I don't believe that the idea of absolute equal seats as a distribution was a very a realistic or helpful way of looking at Senate reform, considering all the other possibilities. And, you know, folks, this information is available if you want to see it from me, but, you know, there was all kinds of possibilities that were considered, going from sort of 6 seats each for everybody except for Quebec and Ontario, who got 10, to a sort of 6, 12, 18, and 24 formula that moved from the smallest to the largest with that allocation, or one that had 6 for PEI, 12 for everybody except for 24 for Quebec and Ontario. So you can see there's all kinds of possibilities depending on how you're trying to sort that out. But if you start with the idea that you're expecting senators to not represent people on a geographic basis, you're trying to get them to represent either on regional issues, or what I was interested in was representation from other constituency groups. So, for example, and I'm sorry, one of the other things that we kept looking at was a certain number of the seats that were set aside and designated for Aboriginal representation. I'm pretty sure we were looking at 5%. Of course, what the discussion that went along with that is, okay, if it's 5% for Aboriginals and that's representative of their population base in Canada at the time, we should be saying 50% for women, which of course I was very much in favour of. But you also start to work in some of those other mixes like New Canadians or representation from particular cultural groups that are heavily invested in Alberta. You could be very creative and imaginative. This is a huge opportunity to bring other voices into our chambers of decision, to have those voices represented at the table or at the Senate desk, to be able to comment on the legislation that was proceeding through those two houses. So to me, I saw it as a huge opportunity to engage more of our population in this and to have those voices amplified and represented in the House. I was really excited by this concept, and clearly I still am. But you're not going to get that until you deal with that how the seats are distributed. And just saying 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 across the board, it doesn't work as far as I'm concerned. So while I was in favor of elected senates, fine by me, you have to deal with a system that is not a first-past-the-post system, or you just entrench everything. So if you're going to elect, you need to look at your electoral system. You absolutely have to deal with how the Senate seat distribution goes. In order to do that, you must change the amending formula for the Constitution about who gets to weigh in on this. And there was quite a good formula that was looked at, which I think it was 750. So it had 7 of the provinces representing 50% of the population. The idea was that you couldn't just have Ontario and Quebec gang up together and amend the Constitution and leave everybody else out. So it had to be 7 provinces representing 50% of the population, which I thought was a pretty good formula, and I was willing to sign on to that one, and clearly I still am. The scope of the Senate power, which I talked about earlier, would they be able to comment or debate on money bills? Could they even introduce money bills? Could they be involved in ratification of appointments and that kind of thing? What would be the scope of what they did? So there was lots of possibilities here, but Triple E just didn't do that. And Triple E is really the most basic approach to senatorial reform. And forgive me for saying the one with the least amount of flair and creativity to it. And Canada is a creative country. We are an innovative country, and I'd like to see more innovation brought to this debate than that Triple E. And this is the one that I'm referring to, is the one that was developed by McCormick and Manning and Gibson in their book Regional Representation, and then reiterated by Alberta's Select Committee on Senatorial Reform in 1985. So strict equality of the provinces in the form of identical numbers of senators. The Senate should represent populations purely and single-mindedly. I'm out of time.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview.
Yes, I was absolutely intrigued with the members. We have 5 minutes
for question.
Yes, I was intrigued with the member's comments, and I'm wondering if she had anything else to say.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre.
Well, clearly I did, so thank you for that. Sorry, I was just talking about the Triple E Senate because I wanted to close off on that, because I think it was the most basic approach to senatorial reform. So it just looked at an absolute identical numbers of senators. It looked at an election but did not comment on any kind of electoral reform. So it would end up using a first-past-the-post system. And in fact, we have had, I think, 1 set or 2 sets of senatorial elections in Alberta, and that's exactly what they did. They just dumped it onto the municipalities and said, go ahead and run it exactly the same way. So we had no innovation there. And for the scope of it, they actually moved back a step because once again it was to be done on an absolute representation of the population. The provincial populations. So the criticism that was brought forward during the debates that I attended is that the way it would be applied to the ratios, and I've already pointed out the differences between Ontario and Quebec and Prince Edward Island, and really that's brought home by the fact that there are probably a dozen Ontario municipalities that have more population than Prince Edward Island in its entirety. And that just doesn't end up... We have to have buy-in from the population when we do things like this. And that kind of a ratio just does not get buy-in. It becomes laughable to people. So I think there's great possibility in senatorial reform. There's lots to talk about inside of all of those categories that I outlined for you. It was a very exciting opportunity to go and spend 5 days with a diversity of people from across the country talking about Senate reform. I'm disappointed that it never went any further because I think it should. But I don't see that creativity or anything else involved in the bill that's before us. Thank you.